Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Tech Until Tuesday. It is Tuesday. It's 2 p.m. somewhere, Central Time. Thanks for being here. Listen, I have been thinking a lot lately about broad strategies and tactics on how to counter a color revolution or some popular revolution, mass defiance, resistance, whatever we end up seeing, which is starting now. I mean, they're building this machine now. So let's start from kind of square one here, square zero. There are protest groups, quote unquote protest groups. There are these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and they are active. They're rebuilding. They're trying to gain traction. A couple weeks ago, mid-July, this group called Indivisible. I talked about it on this morning briefing. Indivisible started this new online training series, and it's called 1 Million Strong, and they want to train 1 million organizers, not just on organizing protests. Okay, if we think about a pyramid. Actually, I'll pull this pyramid up in a second. If we just think about a pyramid, the base of that pyramid is sustained protests. Okay, so they've built a protest movement. That's why we've seen these multiple iterations now of days of protests and days of action and days of resistance from Indivisible, 5051, the John Lewis, whatever thing, the Good Trouble group, whatever. They just had a national day of protest a few weeks ago. Kind of a blip on the radar screen. But what they're doing is they're building a base of a pyramid. And once they have, I think they've built that base up. They have definitely achieved sustained protests, pretty toothless protests, but they have achieved it. Indivisible claims that they have like 5 million people now on a couple of their days of protests or days of resistance. Probably not 5 million, 3 million I can see, but still that's quite significant. One of the things that they continually talk about, first of all, they're talking about this stuff back in 2020. More recently, 5051, those folks have been talking about it. That's the 50 states or 50 protests, 50 states, one day, even though they've had multiple one days. And then Indivisible talked about it in this training, and this goes back to this concept of the 3.5 percenters on the left. What they say is Erica Chenoweth, I think that's her name. She wrote this book. It's worth a read. I read it a couple of years ago. I need to read it again, probably take notes this time. She wrote a book called Why Civil Disobedience Works, or Why Non-Resistant Something Works. Hang on, I'll get this for you. There we go. Why Civil Resistance Works. Great. And one of the things that she and her other researchers, one of the things they found is that when you have a country that has a dictatorial regime or some form of authoritarian regime, it takes just 3.5% of the populace to engage in active defiance or active opposition to the regime. So this is everything from protests to non-cooperation to direct action or intervention. Okay, that's you have a phase of different different activities there. All it takes is 3.5% to erode the base of support for that authoritarian regime. I explained it on this morning's briefing. I also posted a standalone video. I'm not going to rehash all that stuff. You can go back and watch it. It's on the Forward Observer YouTube channel if you'd like to watch it. So that's what they're working towards. Now, 3.5% in the United States today would be about 12 million people. on these protests, they've gotten easily 3 million people. So just kind of do the math. They're working towards that. A lot of people were, I wouldn't say a lot of people, some people were doubtful that you could have that kind of revolution here in the United States. I'm not doubtful whatsoever. Remember, we're not talking about 2025 conditions here. The question is, what is going to get more people off the sidelines, particularly on the left and then also in the middle? And there's a few things. I'm not going to delve into them now. The latest thing that I've seen from major investment banks is none of them, I don't think any of them that I recall, are expecting a recession before the midterms. That being said, 2027, 2028, I don't know if there will be a recession or not. If we do have a recession, that puts a lot of people out of work. Maybe it's not a recession. Maybe it's AI. Maybe unemployment starts to tick up because people do start losing their jobs to AI. I'll tell you, one big effect of the next recession is going to be a wave of AI, because when businesses start growing again, they're not going to be hiring back their previous employees. They're just going to be hiring AI developers or whoever to run these AI programs for them. At any rate, my point is, one of the things that made 2020 possible is you just have a lot of people who are out of work. And so the question then becomes, well, in 2028, could we have a lot of people out of work? And if we do, then something like a Summer of Love 2.0, may not be BLM riots, it probably won't be, but something like that will become far more likely. And so I don't at all doubt whatsoever that we could have Summer of Love 2.0 at some point in 2028. Because you look at the history of color revolutions, and it's not always true, but generally they coincide with elections, with big elections. And they typically, I would have to check the history, but many times they come after the election. So maybe it's not 2028, maybe it's into 2029, but whoever doesn't like the results of the election, and then you get this foreign-backed color revolution happen in these countries, people contest the election, and then you have this period of sustained protest and non-cooperation and direct action or intervention against a government, and then finally the government capitulates. This is something that we actually did see being built back in 2020. You recall, hopefully we'll recall this group called Shut Down DC. And someone got into one of their Zoom calls and recorded it and published it online. And they were literally talking about shutting the economy down. They were specifically talking about shutting down DC, not allowing, if President Trump had stayed in office legitimately or illegitimately, it did not matter. Shut down DC, and a constellation of these other left-wing groups and NGOs were talking about shutting down the U.S. economy. This is basically strategic non-cooperation. And their the theory was, if they induced enough economic pain on Americans, that Americans would not defend Trump and support Trump being removed from office, or support Trump stepping down from office. This was their theory, because they said eventually you're going to turn enough people against Trump that he would leave, and people in his administration will leave, and you basically just collapse all support, or a majority of support for the president, and then they leave. That was their plan. That was only 5 years ago. So those plans haven't gone anywhere. The people who made those plans haven't gone anywhere. And that has to be on the table when we look forward to 2028 or 2029. I know Trump has joked about staying in on a third term. I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe he will try. I don't know. But if he does, 2028 is going to be spicy again. So I look at that as kind of the background of what we are very, very likely going to be dealing with at a national level. There's a book that a couple books here. Let me just read you a couple of quotes. So one thing this is Sharp's Dictionary of Power and Struggle, Language of Civil Resistance in Conflicts. This is kind of like a desk reference guide. But I was reading through it, And Gene Sharp, he's the kind of the godfather of strategic non-cooperation, which is the revolutionary model that color revolutions are based on. And he's writing in here, and this is every bit as much a revolution as an armed revolution. It's just a different model. It's just a different form. One of the things he writes is, quote, "Nonviolent action is to be understood as the waging of conflict by methods of protest, non-cooperation, and intervention without physical violence." And so he says there are things that you can do by omission, which is things that you're supposed to do but don't. So that could include like worker strikes, work slowdowns. And then there are acts of commission or commission. And those are things that you do that you're not supposed to do that could also be illegal. And those are you just start looking at that. And then there's another book that he wrote called From Dictatorship to Democracy. I've talked about that many times before. In the back of that book, there's like almost 300 tactics that he lists out that could be used in a period of strategic non-cooperation. And just, remember again, this is a revolution and it's not targeting an administration directly. This is not armed conflict. This is beneath the threshold of armed conflict. This is predominantly political warfare, and it's predominantly nonviolent. But you attack the three broadly, strategically, you attack the three pillars of government. You attack its legitimacy, its authority, and its capacity. So legitimacy is the recognized right of the people to rule. President Trump is legitimate because he was elected. So that's going to be a high bar to overcome, not that they're not trying to. So the next best thing they can do is delegitimize his actions and say, well, he was elected, but he's doing all these illegitimate things, therefore he's an illegitimate president. And when you can impress that upon people, when that's your strategic message, the logical conclusion then is, well, if he's illegitimate, he's got to be replaced by someone who is legitimate. And that is a prerequisite for building this revolutionary movement. The next thing you do is you attack the authority. So you say, these are unjust laws or these are immoral laws, and you encourage people and cities and states not to go along with these laws. So I think immigration enforcement is a really good example of this, of not cooperating with federal authorities to remove illegal aliens. At some point, when a mass of the people no longer follow your laws and you can't enforce your laws, your authority is effectively reduced. And that's one thing they want to do. And then the third thing is attacking the capacity. So any kind of government, any ruler, dictator, authoritarian, whatever, democratically elected president, they've got to have the capacity. They need manpower to do the things they want to do. They need the funding or resources to do the things that they want to do. And so when you can go in and you can get millions of people of a country attacking the capacity, not doing the things that they're supposed to do, or resisting internally, like the civil service, getting military and police to not enforce these laws or to defect. And I'm just talking about broadly this theory. When you can get the elements of society that a government needs to function in order to have legitimacy, capacity, and authority, when you can get them to not cooperate and to oppose a regime, then eventually that leads to regime collapse. And we go back to that 3.5% rule, which is when you get 3.5% of the country doing this. So in America, this would be 12 million. You get 12 million people doing this historically. It's like a 90-something% chance that you'll be effective in toppling a regime, just historically. And they've done these studies, like literally hundreds of examples. I think, probably close to 100 examples. The most popular study was like a 30-year study done from 1991 to 2021. They looked at 35 different cases and they came to these conclusions. At any rate, so point being, I start this video with that as context because that is the movement they are building. I know that because you sit through these training videos. They're literally talking about this stuff. That is the movement that they are building. I think one of the unique, I don't know if it's unique, one of the interesting aspects of this strategy is that there is I call it a runway for escalation. There's an escalation ladder. Okay. It starts with protests. If protests don't work, you move to direct action. and selective resistance or mass resistance. And then if that doesn't work, then you move to revolution. And there also is this layer of plausible deniability in here, because right now, all these people, these groups and organizers, all they're talking about is, oh, well, we have to stop the authoritarian regime. Well, anybody to the right of Mitt Romney is a fascist to these people. And so there's some plausible deniability, because they can say, oh, we're not a revolutionary movement. We just want to save democracy. We're just defending democracy here. But they have the option to continue to escalate. It's like having a bazooka in your backpack. Okay, you move from a pistol to a rifle, and then, that's probably a bad example. But the example, the analogy still is, there is still room to escalate if they so choose, or if they believe that the situation warrants it or conditions warrant it, which means that a J.D. Vance as a presidential candidate, I don't even know if it will be J.D. Vance. Maybe it's someone else, but someone else who is a quote unquote Trumpist or Trump aligned, a rightist, a right wing, anybody wins the presidential election. I can't tell you there's 100% chance, obviously, but I think that's a risk they're not willing to take. They don't want to go through another 4 years of this. And the question is, are they willing to kind of kill the host to be in control? I'll let you decide that for yourself, but I think probably so. Let me bring up a couple other things here as this relates to tactical intelligence to us at the local level. And one question I see often is, Mike, what can we do about it? If this is, I fully expect this to happen in 2028, at least things to get a lot spicier in 2028. Again, maybe it's not BLM riots. Maybe it's worker strikes. Maybe it is the strategic non-cooperation. You have millions of Americans on the left, NPR Americans, who say, well, we're not going to go to work, or we're not going to do these things that help society function until a J.D. Vance or whoever the Republican presidential candidate is, or whoever gets elected, steps down. Let's go back to that shutdown D.C. They've still got the plans. They're still around. Under the right conditions, I think they could probably just reprise those plans. What this means to me is a couple of things. Number one, there's just a huge focus, and I apologize if I just repeatedly talk about this and you're tired of hearing it. Some people are. But there's just a huge focus on guns and ammo and kit and, oh, we got to have all this stuff. All that time that you spend, it's important. Guns solve one or two problems extremely well. And they solve those problems so well that there's just no alternative. Without guns, you will lose, period. You have to have them. Not only is it a deterrent, but threats have to remain credible. But beyond those one or two problems, guns will not help you win this type of conflict. Not in the way that many people think they will. And because this is not an armed conflict. Maybe it does escalate into some form of armed conflict. Or maybe there will be armed political violence or some components of this conflict, which is obviously armed. That very well could happen. But that's not the main effort. The main effort is that this is political warfare, not an armed conflict. And the main effort happens on the political, social, and economic planes. That is the battlefield. This is inherently a political war. A lot of people have talked about, they call this an insurgency. Oh, the left is building an insurgency. Well, maybe it's a proto-insurgency. It's not a classical insurgency in the sense of the Department of Defense, how they define insurgency, because it is not armed, the armed element is not the main effort. The main effort is probably going to stay not predominantly nonviolent. Not to say that there won't be violence. There obviously will. But they're talking about attacking the legitimacy, authority, and capacity of a government. And when they can get millions of Americans to do that, you have a real problem that guns simply cannot solve. And in many cases, guns actually compound the problem, because any state level violence, like if the Insurrection Act gets invoked, if we see National Guard or active duty soldiers or Marines deployed, or any kind of military assistance to civil disturbance type missions here domestically, that is just going to feed in to that dictatorship narrative. And those images, the videos, the pictures, all that stuff is just going to be turned around and used against the administration. And I can't believe I'm really not simping for the federal government here, but if we got to live under one or the other, like I know what my choice is, obviously. If we got to live under leftism or a Trump administration, obviously that's my choice is clear. So with that in mind, the question is, what can you do at the local level? And obviously everything starts with an area study. I would pay particularly close attention, really do your due diligence when it comes to identifying local political activist groups, social groups, any kind of group, any kind of demographic group or subgroup that could play an active role, or that will likely play an active role in local protests or disruption or civil unrest. You've got to identify those people in your area so that you can determine your risk. Also, you've got to identify them so you can determine your response. What is your response going to be? And we'll get to that in just a second. Everything has to start with an area study. By the way, your area study is also how you identify allies. One of the most popular questions I get is, Mike, how do I find like-minded people in my area? Because I want to link up with them and I want to build a network. I watch Tech Intel Tuesday. I know how important networks are. And I know that everything flows from networks. Manpower, intelligence, logistics, skills, resources, all that stuff, money, funding, all that stuff comes from networks. And if you don't have networks, if your networks aren't deep, you're probably not going to have deep resources when you need them. Remember, peacetime networks form the basis of wartime networks. It is extremely difficult to build networks during a time of war. It's far easier to do it before a conflict breaks out. And I say war and conflict, but that could be a tornado that devastates your town. It could be a hurricane, an earthquake, whatever. Your fight could be an election in the midterms or in 2028 or beyond. It could be disaster response. Whatever your fight is, peacetime networks before that hurricane hits are the basis for wartime networks during that hurricane disaster response. You've got to build the networks now because it's exponentially more difficult to build them when there's disruption to communications, the internet, the information space. And I'm not saying network needs to happen on the internet. The internet, online things are a tool. They should not be the locus of your organizing efforts. That should be in meet space. That should be face-to-face, probably physical meetings for the most part. So area study, build your intelligence networks. Those are absolutely two phenomenal things that you can be doing prior to this. Beyond that, I want to share, I've talked about this book several times before. It's my all-time favorite book. Freaking love this book. It's so good. It is called The Art of Counterrevolutionary War. It's by John J. McEwen. It was published back in 1966. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And it is a treatise on counter-revolutionary warfare. You know, it's funny. I was on ChatGPT today asking it questions, just helping me do research. And I said, give me a list of books that have been written about how to counter color revolutions or how to counter any form of popular revolution. And it gave me a whole bunch of stuff on waging color revolution. I said, no. Give me books that are expressly about countering these revolutions. And there are none. There are very few. There are a handful of monographs written by Russians. And the Russian way of countering color revolution is just control the media, control the information space, conduct surveillance on these networks, identify the ringleaders and organizers, probably kill them or arrest them. Just very authoritarian things. Cook up charges against them. things that the Trump administration is just not going to get away with. So, my conclusion is there's not a lot of good options for an administration to combat a color revolution within the letter of the law, or at least within the Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights. We'll just say the Bill of Rights, which is a little bit concerning. There are not a lot of good options. There are certainly some things that could be done. Remember, this is a conflict over legitimacy. This is about who has the recognized right to be in office, or to remain in office, or to pursue the obligations of our federal government. Being that this is a war for legitimacy, there are just some things the Trump administration has to do, like immigration enforcement, that are going to be seen by some as illegitimate because they don't want those laws enforced. I think at a strategic, and I'm not a PSYOP guy, and I know we have them in this audience. I know that what I would expect, one thing that maybe I would like to see is a lot more emphasis on why the people who oppose immigration enforcement oppose it. Because to me, this is not just a difference of political flavor. This is a completely difference in kind. We're talking about a whole different kind of country. And this is not just a simple political disagreement, at least not to me. Being that this is a fight for legitimacy, I'm not advocating the Trump administration do or not do anything. But I do want to point out, I would expect to see a lot more messaging around this is federal law. This has been federal law for a long, long time. And if you don't have a country without a border is not much of a country at all. And again, I'm not a PSYOP guy, so I don't know what the strategic message is there. But it's a little bit concerning to me, being that there's such a large gap here, especially over immigration. But it's not just immigration. It's over capitalism versus socialism. It's over a lot of things. Big government versus small government. Small government is definitely losing that fight. So at any rate, let's get back to this book, The Art of Counter-Revolutionary War. And McEwen's advice in this book, which in hindsight, spot on, 100%. He says, you have to take, he's talking about counter-revolutions or counterinsurgencies. And he says, you've got to take, you start with it by identifying the phase that a revolution is in, or a phase that an insurgency is in. And then you've got to do the opposite. And he talks about the French experience in Algeria and Indochina and the big failings that the French experienced. One of the things during the Algerian insurgency is where you basically have these Muslims and communists who are nationalists, anti-French. They wanted to kick the French out. And they go around, especially the communist elements of like the FLN, go around and they start building these recreation groups. Like they would start a recreation soccer league and attract a bunch of kids and go play soccer. And they would have these like knitting circles, basically, or these women's groups. And they would just go and create all these social groups. And on the face, they were recreational. They were social groups. But you peel back the cover just a little bit, and they're communist indoctrination groups. They weren't just playing soccer with these kids because they liked playing soccer. They were indoctrinating these children into communist thinking. They were not just talking to these women about knitting socks or whatever, a coat. They were indoctrinating these women into communist thought. And it took the French a long, long time to figure this out, like way too long. And that's one of the central conclusions that McEwen makes in this book, is that governments often wait way too long to respond to revolutionary movements. Once the period of violence breaks out, it is very difficult to push that back to the organization phase. Broadly, if you look at it like a Maoist insurgency model, we're looking at three phases. There's the organizing phase, which is what we're in the United States right now. We're in the organization phase. And then there's the guerrilla phase. And again, this is just for Maoist insurgencies. There's a guerrilla phase. And then there's war of movement or mobile warfare, which is conventional. And so McEwen's whole thing is you identify which phase you're in, and then you've got to do the opposite. And that's why we have like counterinsurgency doctrine for all its faults. The best thing that McEwen has talked about in this book, again, it's for those of you who just come in, it's called The Art of Counterrevolutionary War. You can find it online, pirate it. I'm not telling you to, I'm just telling you can. You have the ability to. Everyone should read this book. He says, you've got to counter-organize. If you have an insurgency or you have a revolutionary movement that is in the organization phase, you have to counter-organize at the local level. And what that looked like, the French made this new organization called the SAPI. I don't even remember what it stands for. It's French. And it was like basically the intelligence and influence something or another. But you have these French generals who eventually recognized the problem that communists were able to organize all throughout the country and recruit. Remember, networks equals manpower, or network equals manpower. Network equals logistics. Network equals intelligence. Network equals everything. And so if you want to cut in to society, if you want to cut these communists off from society, this is what the French generals concluded, then you've got to compete with them in organizing. And now that's why we get counter-organizing. And so the SAPI went through and they tried to make other social groups to do the same thing and recruit Algerian society and recruit Algerians into being pro-French. And I think they were offering them citizenship, and he said, hey, come help fight us, come help us fight the FLN, and we'll make you French citizens, and we'll give you all this stuff. And they had these slogans that they were printing, and it was like France plus I forget exactly what it was. Hey, on that point, I forget exactly what these French slogans were. They're in the book. I could look them up if I had time. The Taliban in Afghanistan made extremely good use of political messaging. It's like Pashtun, our people, or Pashtun, our nation. The Quran, like our book. Afghanistan, like our nation. Basically things like that. It's just extremely effective at really dividing a line, not just between the Afghans and the Americans, but between the Islamic, with gyro, the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, who are I wouldn't even want to say pro-American. They weren't necessarily pro-American, but they were still looked at obviously as like an occupational government, like a puppet government of the U.S. But they drew this very distinct line between them and the Taliban, which is the rightful government, or at least according to them. That's the power of strategic messaging. That's something that I think the left is very good at. Like no King's Day. That's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, it's pithy. You say no kings, everybody knows what you're talking about. And like hands off. Okay, two simple words, the hands off protests. Hands off our democracy. The hands off the National Day of Protest. Okay, everyone gets that. I don't know that MAGA is pithy, but I don't know that there is the same level of like strategic messaging that really reaches down into people at a psychological level. And maybe I'm wrong. If you can recall some, let me know. But that's one area where I think the right probably needs to get it together, and soon. Or heritage Americans, or whatever you call yourself. It's a problem we got to solve. So at any rate, let's get back to counter-organizing. So if you do have one of these groups in your area, chances are good that you do, even if it's small. If it's not in your town, it's definitely in your county. There's in all places. But I have to run and go do radio interview here in just a second. But counter organizing is so important. You're competing for support of the people around you. And if more of that support is going to your opposition, then you are going to be losing. And if more of that support around you is going to you, then your opposition is going to be losing. Everything comes down to counter-organizing. And the way to, I think, near as I can tell, the way to defeat a counter-revolution is not in the decisive phase. You cannot allow a color revolution to reach the decisive phase to fight against it because it's too late. It's too late. There's nothing you can do. Not easy, at least. It's just like a forest fire. If you can catch the sparks of a forest fire and put it out early, then you can prevent 1 million acres from going up in smoke. Otherwise, that's what you're dealing with. You're going to be dealing with a 1 million acre forest fire when you could have just put out a small brush fire in the very beginning, but you didn't. That is the mistake that governments that governments make. They wait too long to put out a brush fire, and then they're dealing with a massive wildfire. I don't know how long, I don't know what the Trump administration is doing. Maybe they're not doing anything. I'll tell you, they did not do a very good job the first time around. Maybe this time around, maybe it's different. But it seems to me that maybe the Trump administration is waiting too long, which is just a vital, a critical mistake that many people, many governments have made. And I think the French experience in Algeria is probably one of the best examples. Was it 1954? November 1954? You have like 70 bombings or something like that all happen on the same morning. Highly coordinated, to my understanding, complete and total surprise for the French, the government in Algeria. Can't wait that long. All right, guys, we'll do maybe like 10 minutes of Q&A. Everyone, hey, by the way, thanks for being here. If you do have a question, drop a Q with your question in the chat. So when I scroll down through here, I'll be able to find it. Is anyone in the U.S. government, Trump administration, paying attention to this developing color revolution? And is there any way to stop it now? I'm sure someone is paying attention to it. I don't actually know what they're doing. Identifying that you have a problem is the first step. Formulating a coherent solution is another animal entirely. If you know someone in the Trump administration, hit me up because I would love to volunteer and go help formulate a strategy. Period. All right. No tyrants protests are happening in Canada as well. Our federal government are welcoming them with open arms. What is Canada's role in all this? I don't know. I don't know anything about Canada other than it's up there. I don't follow Canada very closely. Like the domestic situation, like the trucker protests and all that stuff. Okay, I followed that back when it was happening. But post-Trudeau and this Carney clown you have up there, I'm really not familiar with it. Let me know, is it worth my time? Should I look into it? I guess the no tyrants protests are against Trump, but in Canada. I guess. Armed conflict will be the only option left in the next few years. Trump will not relinquish the White House in 2028. He backed off about running after people paid attention to what he said for once. I don't know. I don't think armed conflict will be the only option left. Oops. Makes sense. I'm going to realize that Canada is only 5 to 10 years away from what is going on in the U.S. Trudeau has completely divided people. Okay. I guess that comment was made last year. Do you think we will see bear attacks on infrastructure like sabotage, slow walk-in, and repairs? Yes. We very likely that we will. Obviously can't predict that we will for sure. However, One of the things that we covered here at Ford Observer back in 2020 was this plot to go bomb the FedEx facility in Memphis, Tennessee. And they wanted to do that because, by the way, I did not see this in the news anywhere other than what we reported on. But there was a plot to do that because they wanted to disrupt commercial activity. They said, okay, if you take out this FedEx place in Memphis, it's probably like one of the busiest in the country by volume. It is the hub for FedEx, and we want to impact economic and commercial activity. That's what they're doing. I would be shocked, I tell you, if we didn't see this or something like that happen. Listen, and there's still a long way to go before we hit 2028. It's way too early to make predictions about what will happen or what could happen because it's so far away. But I can tell you, if we stay on this trajectory, and I don't think he will, but maybe he does. If Trump is actually serious about trying to seek a third term, there's no legal way that he could do that, which leads me to believe that he's, not to take him literally on that, I think Trump just says stuff sometimes just to make people freak out, especially on the left. But listen, in the off chance that he does, then yeah, we'll definitely see this 2028 stuff. I don't know. They'll be making movies about it in the future. How do you build allies? Suddenly a customer shows up. What do you mean, how do you build allies? You just make friends. Go to church. Just go to your county political meetings. Go play in a rec baseball or softball league or soccer or free tag, whatever you got. I don't care. Go meet people. That's the way you got to do it. You just got to get out and meet people. Or you could do that. Or you can start your own organization and invite your first few friends and talk about it and evangelize, proselytize, and get people to show up and attend your meetings. So either or both. Aren't we seeing generally that fairly normal people are getting sick of the far left and their nonsense? Yes, we are still seeing fatigue there. Fatigue about a lot of things. Won't that hinder that 3% needed for color revolution? Listen, no, I don't, because will it hinder the left's ability to generate 3.5% mobilization? No, it won't, because you have 30% of this country. Trump could cure cancer and achieve world peace. I don't know. He could feed all the hungry children all around the world, and they would still be anti-Trump. So, no, I don't think that will hinder their ability to achieve 3.5% mobilization just because they have a much larger pool to draw from. They're not dependent on fatigued Americans to achieve that 3.5%. I think they've got the capacity there. Whether they achieve it, I don't know if they will or not. But clearly, we look at 2020. That's the result of 4 or 5 years of agitation, just constant, nonstop, every day in your face, from media and news, from social media, corporations, everywhere, church, everywhere you turn, you were being agitated against Trump. And so we have not had that over the past 4 years, not in the same way that we saw it from 2016 to 2020. But we see this from 2024 to 2028. And just logically, you can conclude, well, if it takes multiple years of agitation, then that's an indicator that we will see something on the order of 2020 in 2028. Not a prediction, not a foregone conclusion, but I'm just talking about that one specific indicator. You got to rile up the base. And it's not just riling up the base. You have to build pressure in the system. I'll tell you two things that could be two huge, very important accelerators of conflict. Number one is this mid-decade redistricting. We talk about it every few days on our morning briefing. The other thing is the Supreme Court ruling. They're going to rule on basically racial gerrymandering. There are some lower court decisions that said states like Alabama and Louisiana had to have a majority minority district. Like in Alabama, basically the court ruled that Alabama had to set aside a district just for black people. And that probably goes back to the whatever voting rights, whatever thing act. I don't know. But the lower court said they had to do that. Supreme Court's going to hear. If they rule, especially in like a split decision, 5-4, if they rule against this racial gerrymandering and they say states like Alabama and Louisiana don't have to give a specific district just to black people, my question is, are we like back on BLM watch? Because Black Lives Matter as a movement is a political non-entity. I mean, virtually they're powerless. But that's not to say that we couldn't see them restart that kind of movement or protests following this Supreme Court decision. I don't know if that's going to matter a hill of beans or not, but that's something that, frankly, we should at least be considering. How about going after the funders? Well, you could, but the question is, what laws are they breaking? I mean, I think the only way you go after the funders is by getting a RICO case against someone. By the way, that guy in LA that drove his truck and dropped off that huge truck bed full of those respirators that Antifa wears, he was released because they couldn't charge him with anything. So I think the hurdle here is going to be, what do you charge them with? Because funding protests alone is not illegal. So, but generally, yes, you go after funders, facilitators, you go after that link in the link of the chain, and you have downstream effects. All right, guys, a couple more questions here, and then I got to bounce. Can you talk about becoming part of a left-wing group and causing division and drama? So, first of all, I think they do a pretty good job themselves of creating internal division and drama amongst themselves. Or is that irrelevant to counter-organizing? That is not exactly counter-organizing, but you go back and you study the history of COINTELPRO, which is an FBI counterintelligence program run from like the mid-1950s to 1971. Discrediting movements, discrediting leaders, that's one of the things they did. Actually, the FBI has a very long history, because you go back into the 19-teens and there was a domestic, you wouldn't call them, they're a political party. I don't know if you'd call them a terrorist group, but they were definitely subversive. They were called the Socialist Workers Party. And the FBI would go around and surveil these meetings and identify their members. And then, I think it's Brian Burrow who actually talks about this. No, actually it's not. It's some other book. I forgot what it is. But they would go around to the friends and family members of these Socialist Workers Party members. They might go to the house of this guy's girlfriend's parents, and they say, "Oh, do you know your daughter is dating a communist?" And they would oppose that, and they would encourage the daughter or make the daughter break up with the guy. Or they would go to the parents, or they'd go to employers or whatever. Say, "Do you know that you are employing a communist?" And maybe they would get fired. So that's something that the FBI used to do. Just throw that out there. But that's not exactly an example of counter-organizing, but that is maybe an example of effective tactics. I'm not actually sure what you would call that, other than maybe informant influence or some level of psyop. Let's see here. All right, guys, I'm looking for one last good question, and then I got to bounce. If you're a community organizer, what can you do to make sure your organization doesn't fall into this trap? I'm not sure which trap you're talking about, but I assume you mean maybe not being infiltrated. 4 words here. Keep it sane, keep it local. So I think one area where the right wing goes catastrophically wrong is by trying to organize these national level groups. And it's not so much a huge problem now, but back during Obama, it was really bad. Basically, you'd have this guy. He's like, I'm a colonel," and they would form a militia or something, and it would be like this national level organization. And there's like 20 dudes in this national level organization, and they're all scattered. There are 20 dudes in 15 states, and that was their national level organization. It just doesn't work for us. The hierarchy, the command and control, all this stuff. Don't worry about it. What you need to focus on is your community. And instead of having state level groups or national level groups, and by the way, I'm not saying you specifically. This is not advice for you. This is just advice for anyone. You got to have fractal organizations, okay? Meaning overlapping. You overlap with the town next to you. Once you have a group up and running, your next goal is to find someone in the neighboring town or maybe the neighboring county and help them build their own group there. And now you've got mutual aid between these two groups, and there's no national level anything. If a tornado or hurricane rips through, now you got a group of guys one town over. If something worse happens, now you got a group of guys one town over, and you've got their network, and maybe you have some of their resources for mutual aid. That's what they need to do. No one needs to be linking up with someone in another state unless that other state's 15 minutes from you. This stuff's got to be fractal. It's got to be local and overlapping. And you go out, maybe a county, and that's probably about as far as you need to be trying to network with people in general. Of course, that makes too much sense. So in terms of not being infiltrated, I mean, you're just going to have to run the risk, frankly. It's like someone on Twitter today said, I was talking about nonviolent resistance and how that is the revolutionary model that we're probably going to see. It's because it's already building and will probably culminate in 2028, maybe before. And this guy posted some article about Canada, about these two Canadian truckers who were arrested. And he said, ask the Canadians how that worked out for them. And of course, if you violate a law somewhere, of course you're going to be arrested, or you're very, very likely to be arrested. And it's just like these, people talk about, I don't know. Sometimes you got to crack an egg to make an omelet. I mean, there are going to be losses somewhere or the other. That's just going to be a reality of anything. But one thing you could do, there's a couple things you can do. Number one is vet your people as much as possible. I think asking for, maybe not even references, but listen, I always feel much better when there's a local guy and he's like, "Oh yeah, I was born here and my granddad's from here and my great granddad's from here." And it's like, "Oh, do you know such and such family?" "Oh yeah, I know that." "Oh, do you know this guy?" "Oh yeah, I went to high school with this guy." Okay, I probably feel just basically a little bit better about that guy because I know that he's actually local. But these people coming in from out of state, moving all over there's no way that I can verify their history. I mean, not really. I guess if I really took the time, I could. But listen, this is a topic for another live stream. Maybe we can cover that next week. But I think the biggest thing is just focus on building a local disaster relief organization, a local search and rescue organization, a local whatever, disaster response crew. And that's probably where you're going to find people who have some level of agency because they want to go and help people. You're going to probably find people who tend to be more fit than unfit because these aren't people playing maybe they do play video games, but these are the people who, they want to go kit up and they want to go rescue people from floodwaters during the next hurricane. And they're also probably going to be people more likely to show up to practice that. Oh, we're going to practice our ropes. We're going to start building rope systems. We're going to go do swiftwater rescue. We're going to go do this. We're going to go set up a comms bubble in the national forest and work on our radios. Those are probably going to be people who are far more likely to show up. Just remember, peacetime networks form the basis for wartime organizations or wartime networks. And the time to be building this stuff is obviously now. Don't wait. I said that was the last question. Let me make sure. Do leftists do the national level well? I mean, yes and no. Like I look at these protest organizations, they are there to facilitate local networks. Yes, there's a national level network, but they're not trying to build any kind of command and control. And even you look at Antifa, there is no command and control. There is no hierarchy. There's no membership. There's no commander. There's none of that stuff. It's very flat and open on the bottom. And it's also extremely local. These are parochial organizations, okay? It's not like they have this big, massive national level structure. They don't. They're autonomous. They're local to a specific area. They also have a very high security culture, and it's just ingrained in them. And they don't always do the best at OPSEC, obviously. Locally, they don't. But in general, I think those are two other things that insulate them from infiltration. I think did I talk about this last week? Basically, you have all these, people in these cities, like at Portland, for instance. There are these radical left-wing coffee shops. There's radical bookstores, and like your name and a face, like you are around. People know you, or you go to these punk rock shows, these music, whatever. You're in the metal scene, whatever you are. You're in the campus organizations. You've been around for a while. You're not a complete stranger to these people. And these are the friends, the networks that they form these affinity groups with. So I don't know why this is so difficult for right-wing groups, but it's like, man, I just met this guy on the internet 15 minutes ago. Now he's in my group. Why does it take that? All right, everyone. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. At least get your gears grinding here. I will be back next Tuesday for another Tech Intel Tuesday. If it's your first time, thanks for watching. Tuesday, 2 p.m. Central Time. I'll hop on here, talk about things that I want to talk about, generally answer some questions, but really try to teach people about tactical intelligence, because that is going to help you navigate the future, whatever that is. So everyone, thanks for watching. We'll be back with a morning briefing tomorrow at 08 Central Time. Everyone, thanks so much for your support. And until then, be well and stay out front.